Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to SUMA Convention 2015. Welcome to Saskatoon. Let's give yourselves a round of applause for coming out in this minus 30 weather. I don't know what it is about the SUMA convention, but we tend to have it at one of the coldest times of the year. It was beautiful a week ago, and I was thinking, right on, it's going to be +5. I can walk from the hotel. Yeah, not happening. Anyways, you're in for a very informative session this afternoon. First of all, I'll introduce myself. I'm on your SUMA Board of Directors. My name is Dawn Looning. I'm a City Councillor in the City of Moose Jaw. And a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. First of all, there's a microphone in the middle of the room for the question and answer period at the end. And all of these sessions are being recorded. And my understanding is that the sessions will be up on the SUMA website the week of February 16th. So you need to speak clearly into the microphone so that everybody can hear you on the recorded session, and also, of course, here in the room. So some safety procedures that I am told we need to go through, being that this is the start of the convention. So in the event of an emergency, this building is equipped with alarms that will sound and strobe signals that will flash. The building alarm system has 2 stages. The first stage is a warning, and then the second stage is an evacuation, which is a continuous ring and strobes. You will be guided by TCU Place staff and announcements through the building to direct your evacuation. Please make your way calmly. I always love that, calmly, right? Let's hope we can all stay calm if it's not a really serious situation. Stay calm and exit to the west onto 22nd Street. Use the stairwells, which are marked with exit signs. Do not use the elevator. If you are mobility impaired, you will be assisted by TCU Place staff. Remain outside the building until you are advised by TCU Place staff that we have been cleared to return. And there are 5 exits from the salon level. Down the grand staircase, which is flanked by floor-to-ceiling windows. Down the west staircase, which is at the opposite end of the salon meeting rooms, near the men's washroom. Through the 4 exit doors near the women's washroom. Down the fire stairwell front of Salon A, and down the fire stairwell at the end of Salon D. There's a test at the end of this, so all of you have to remember all of that information. So let's get started with our session this afternoon. I'm going to introduce our 3 speakers initially at the beginning, and then they're each going to come up and do a presentation for us. Colin King is the Deputy Commissioner, Director of Operations for the Emergency Management and Fire Safety Branch of the Government Relations Public Safety Division. He was born in Saskatoon and raised in various small towns in Saskatchewan, with the exception of 2 years in Brisbane, Australia. Enrolling in the Canadian Army's Royal Regina Rifles in 1986, he has over 22 years of full-time and part-time service as an infantry officer. He retired from the Army Reserve in 2008 as a lieutenant colonel after serving as commanding officer of the Royal Regina Rifles. Colin entered the public service in 1994 with Saskatchewan Emergency Planning and has held a variety of roles related to provincial emergency planning and operations since. During emergency operations, Colin acts as incident commander in the Provincial Emergency Operations Centre, coordinating provincial resources from ministries, crowns, and agencies in support of local efforts. Colin and his wife Lori have 2 children and enjoy camping, hunting, motorcycles, golf, and squash. Ken Peters is the Emergency Management Organization Coordinator for Regina Beach and Buena Vista. He was born in Scarborough, Ontario, and came to Saskatchewan in 1969. He enlisted with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and served for 2.5 years in the North Battleford area before moving on to the Regina Police Service, where he served for 28.5 years. In 2011, Ken was asked to develop an emergency management plan for Regina Beach, and shortly after asked Buena Vista to enter a joint program to combine resources and efforts. Ken has been a member of the Regina Beach and District Lions Club since 1979, serving in many roles on the executive, and is now the District Cabinet Secretary. Ken has also served as the Saskatchewan Director to the Lions Foundation of Canada and Dog Guides Canada from 2005 to 2008. He has been awarded the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal. He and his wife Pearl have 2 children and 2 granddaughters. Bernie Morton is the Chief Administrative Officer for Kindersley, having moved with his family from Ontario in December 2011. Bernie has close to 20 years of senior-level experience working at all 3 levels of Canadian government, as well as offering public affairs counsel to international clients. Before becoming the CAO, he served as Vice President with Sussex Strategy Group, a government relations and communications firm with offices in Toronto and Ottawa. He joined Sussex Strategy Group in 2001 after serving as a Vice President of Government Relations and Client Services at a Toronto-based municipal public affairs firm. In the public sector, Bernie spent 7 years in government working as a Chief of Staff at Toronto City Council starting in 1994. He graduated from the University of Guelph as a political science major and also served with the university's Small Business Consulting Service, a nonprofit organization that provided assistance and consulting advice for small and independent local businesses. And with that, that's the end of the biographies. I will bring up Colin as our first presenter. Give them a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Dawn, and thank you for attending this year's SUMA convention and for sitting through our presentation today. I didn't realize I was in such an august company. I would have lied a little bit more on my biography that I provided so that I could try and keep up with my panel mates. I'm going to quickly scan the room and make sure my boss did not in fact show up today. So he's not here, so I can give you the real presentation I wanted to give. Not the boring one that was not controversial at all. This one we'll try and make it really interesting. So feel free to nod off for those of you that usually do, and for those of you who want to pay attention, good luck to you. It's going to be pretty fast and furious. We have a lot of slides. I'd like to. I won't be asking you any questions, but occasionally, maybe ask you to put your hand up. That's not too much exercise for a Sunday afternoon, is it? How many people have had in their community or a neighboring community some kind of a major emergency in the last couple of years? Big grass fire, flooding, etc. Exactly. We've seen a lot of things in the last number of years. I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that have happened in Saskatchewan, particularly in the last year. I can't go the last 5 years because we only have 20 or 30 minutes. But we've been fairly busy in the last year or so. I'm going to talk about generally, and my 2 colleagues are going to talk about a couple of specific examples. So should be a good go. Emergency planning is changing globally and in particular in Saskatchewan, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Here's what's changing. Severity of weather events, there's some anecdotal evidence to suggest that they're getting more significant. They're getting more severe. The reality is perhaps there's another camp that believes that we are more susceptible to severe weather events than we used to. We are more vulnerable. Growth in industry, Saskatchewan isn't the same little Saskatchewan that it used to be, is it? Most of us have been here. How many folks have lived here most of their lives, like myself, in Saskatchewan? Absolutely. It isn't the same province as it was 10 years ago, let alone 50 or 100 years ago. It's different. The amount of industry and industrial activity in the province is absolutely significant, and as a result, that comes with it some inherent risks and some vulnerabilities. As well, our digital world, we're becoming more and more dependent, and that has an impact on emergency planning and how we prepare for emergencies and how we are in fact impacted. Around the world, there's been lots of things happening. Some of this won't look at all familiar to Saskatchewan. Some of the emergencies are slightly different. The reality is, it is all the same. In Afghanistan, 350 is what they know for absolute certain. What they estimate, 3,700 deaths from a recent mudslide. In Turkey, underground mine fire. And these are just random examples I had staff put together into this presentation, which I've never read before. I'm finding this out myself right now, too. It's really interesting stuff so far, eh? I'm learning a lot. Turkey, underground mine fire, 300-ish dead, 80-ish injured, and most of those that were killed or injured, it was a result of carbon monoxide poisoning, not actually fire death. In the former Yugoslavia, about 1/3 like 300,000 households without electricity for an extended period of time. Can you imagine, in Saskatchewan, 1/3 of the population of our province being without electricity for an extended period of time this time of year? We had a significant amount of Saskatchewan without electricity a couple of years ago. L'Orange, Prince Albert, I think the Battlefords, etc. They were impacted for on and off for in the area of a week. Anyone from those communities? Am I right? Was it about a week? Yeah, a couple of years ago in the summer. And that was a huge, huge impact on our entire province. I can't imagine that many. The Congo in Africa, 60 killed, 80 some seriously injured from a train derailment. All right, let's talk about home here. Here at home, this time a year ago, our office was working with urban municipalities and rural municipalities and First Nations because of some concerns we had with the amount of snow we had. A little different if you look out the window right now. You'll see that there's not the amount of snow we had a year ago. Also a year ago, besides the amount of snow in a lot of Saskatchewan, in particular in the north central part of Saskatchewan, the ground saturation levels and the storage areas for the water when it melts, they were pretty maxed out. So there was a huge threat last year, like there was in 2010 and 11 going into the spring of 2011. There was a lot of potential for runoff in many, many places in Saskatchewan. Now, runoff equals flooding when the following occurs, right? When you have a lot of snow with a lot of water in that snow, it doesn't necessarily mean flooding. Usually it can go somewhere. And where does it go? Into the ground. If there's no room in the ground, it goes sideways and it goes into, and you know this, it goes into dugouts and rivers and valleys and low areas. If those places are already full and the rivers are rocking already, that water has nowhere else to go but impact us, but to flood us, our homes, our acreages, our towns, our sewer systems, etc. That's what we were going into a year ago. And we spent a lot of time preparing communities for that eventuality. What happened was we got really lucky with how the spring occurred, how the melt occurred. Right? We know it's going to melt every spring. The snow doesn't go through all summer. But if we get a melt freeze, and the timing of everything is right, and in this part of the province, this melt happens and that water goes through the system, and then this part of the province, the melt happens and the water goes through the river system over here, and those eventually link up. It was an absolute fluke. We got away with murder a year ago. So we thought, wow, that's great. No spring flooding, no spring runoff of any real significance a year ago. Happened was, at the end of June, there were some torrential rains. Anyone in that southeast, from, I'm talking Melville all the way down to the southeast corner of the province and that Gainsborough and all that area, anyone from those areas, anyone like Moosomin, etc., torrential rains. And we're going to talk about that. Much of that rain ended up going to a low spot, and I don't know, anyone heard of the Qu'Appelle Valley? It's a little wee coulee kind of thing in the south part of the province. Well, that used to be a major river. It's now a major valley, and there's lakes in the bottom, and everyone loves those lakes, myself included, and a lot of people build communities around those lakes and cottages, etc. So this is what we were faced with. That torrential rain happened on several occasions. It all more or less, most of it ended up heading toward the valley. How many times did I click this? There we go. All of that headed to the valley. Everything, again, are you hitting buttons, Dawn? Keep an eye on her, please. This is Highway 22, and that looks like a lake. Anyone know the name of that lake? Nobody does, because it isn't a lake. It isn't a river. It is normally a ditch that you could jump across. Maybe not you. You don't look like you could jump too far. It's normally a dry ditch, and those rains, all in that Melville kind of country, all headed to there, and they made it, that highway, that culvert was shooting water forever, and that highway backed it up, And this was a massive lake that was going to give at some point. So Water Security Agency, a lot of people have a lot of opinions about them, but we work very closely with them, and they have a lot of experts, and they're very, very busy in the springtime. And they don't do a lot when it comes to predicting things that aren't lakes that they don't know about, highways that are being treated like dams that aren't actually dams. They were able to quickly do some science and do some math on this and figure out how long that may take before that highway failed after consulting with some engineers, because it was going to, how much water was there, where that water was going to go, how much impact that was going to have on Crooked and Round Lakes, where it eventually went to. So it was a very, very weird situation. We had lakes in places that were heading towards communities and heading towards low areas that we had never seen before because of this torrential rains. Sometimes, some of the places had like 100, 200 millimeters, and then it happened several times. I don't know how much, I'm an old guy, I don't know how much 100 millimeters or 200 millimeters is. What is that, like 6, 7, 8 feet? I don't know, something like that. Or is it hectojoules? What is it? 200 millimeters? I don't know how much it is. 8 inches? 8 inches. Could be 8 feet for all I know. About 8 inches in. And that's all it takes. And we have that in the spring. And also, don't forget, the ground was already pretty saturated. So after the people of the valley think, oh, we're not going to flood this year, we got away with the spring runoff and this and that, and yeah, it was high water and we were prepared, and yahoo, we got away with it. Massive rains hit and water came from everywhere, and they flooded anyway. Moving on. At the same time as some parts of Saskatchewan were flooding greatly, we had other parts of Saskatchewan that were on fire because it was dry. Is that where I am? What do they do to everyday life? Melville, this is everyday life. Yep, they had some rains. Yep, they have a small reservoir outside of the town, the city, sorry, and water was coming out of there like crazy, and they were protecting the dam there, but it was coming around it, et cetera, et cetera. It was flooding a small portion of that city, and they had to evacuate a small portion. Unfortunately, the part they had to evacuate was hospital and care home. Infrastructure. I mentioned infrastructure before. We are at risk from infrastructure because we are so dependent on it. Right? When our infrastructure is interrupted, we are dependent on it. We become victims almost immediately. Infrastructure such as transportation. It isn't just electricity. It isn't just gas. It is something as simple as highways. Anyone heard the term just-in-time delivery? Right, our current system of supply in this country is different than it was 50 years ago. It's different than it was 15 years ago. Just-in-time delivery means the groceries in your town are delivered just in time. They are dependent. They have regular trucks coming in. The groceries in the village of Regina that I'm from, sorry, village, town, SUMA, you're experts. What is that? What do I live in? City? City. It's a city now. Attaboy, Mayor Pat. Is he still mayor? No. City of Regina, all the grocery stores there. If the truck doesn't arrive that day, it's almost empty. You know that, right? It's different than it used to be. So something as simple as a few years ago when heavy rains in the Cypress Hills, rock past Maple Creek flooded them out and wrecked Highway 1 near Maple Creek, the impact that had on the supply chain in the country, because that's the #1 highway, was incredible. It was absolutely shocking. We learned so much. And we learned so much about how vulnerable we are and how easy it is to go without very, very quickly. These are some of the reasons why we are, in fact, more vulnerable than we ever were. We are more susceptible to emergencies. You'd think with all the technology, we'd be better prepared. It's not true. We are worse. Water. Even city of Regina, very susceptible to emergencies. They had their own bit of an issue last year. Hands up, how many of your towns have a treatment plant or sewage lagoons, a sewage treatment plant, water treatment plant, so some sort of water infrastructure in your community that you're responsible for? Vast majority, overwhelming majority. My opinion as a municipality, this is a priority. When you have an emergency in your community, this is a priority. It's a huge investment that you have made into quality of life and safety and health, etc., for your community. It's an investment that you've made. It's dangerous and it's an expensive investment. It's very dangerous if it isn't going perfectly. City of Regina had an issue that they had to struggle with. Most of your communities that have had flooding issues over the years, same sorts of issues. It's a reason why you must be prepared. Heavy rains, as well as the usual spring runoff, can have an impact on water treatment facilities and wastewater infrastructure. Huge issue, to the point where the Wastewater Association that meets annually has a topic of emergency preparedness on their agenda almost every year, because they want to connect into your local EMO. They want to be a part of your emergency plan. Factor them in, folks. They're important. We need to be prepared. Who is we? Well, first of all, it starts with the individual. Starts with the individual must be prepared. And we talk about 72 hours, and there's all kinds of literature and pamphlets and what have you on how we can be prepared. You've all lived here your whole life. You're prepared, right? Every single one of you has that emergency kit in the trunk of your car right now, don't you? Come on. Your idiot son-in-law, or that dummy that your daughter is dating, whatever. It starts with him. He needs to be prepared. He needs to be able to look after your children, your grandchildren. They need to be prepared to be able to last for 72 hours, because we don't want immediate burden on the local authority that's trying to deal with the emergency. We don't want instant victims. We want individuals to be prepared. So that's something that you can help do, is have information for the citizens of your community and encourage that all the time. Be prepared. Follow the steps in this brochure. Have the sort of things that you can manage 72 hours on your own. Let's face it. My great-grandparents and my grandparents and my parents, born and raised in Saskatchewan, well, my great-grandparents weren't born here, but hearty pioneers. We aren't like that anymore, and your idiot son-in-law sure isn't. They aren't prepared. If the power would have gone out for a week in my grandfather's day, he wouldn't have noticed, he wouldn't have cared, he'd have carried on. Cows would have got fed, kids would have got to school, family would have eaten, no problem, right? That's the reality of it then. Is that the same now? Think about our kids, our grandchildren. Power goes out now. Something as simple as the electricity goes out. They can't use their phone. They can't do their homework. They can't heat their home. They can't cook their food. Totally dependent on this infrastructure. Totally vulnerable. We aren't the hearty pioneers we think we are, or that we used to be. We really aren't. So it's very, very important for people to take steps to try and get themselves prepared for those first 72 hours. And I think the gents on my left here are going to talk about some of those examples when they talk about their own specific emergencies that their community had. There's still lots of people that don't believe it can't happen here. You can't believe how often our staff have been out to a community and say, yeah, we're just a small town, nothing ever happens here, it's no big deal. You know what? Your town, the smaller it is more vulnerable. You don't have the resources, you don't have necessarily the capacity to deal with the big things that Regina might be able to, or that Melville might be able to. The less you have, the more likely you're going to need more help from neighbors, neighboring communities, or from the province. And the smaller community needs to have a plan even more than the larger community. Let's have a look. It says heavy rainfall event June and July. Gainsborough, that's just the example. That's one community. How many different communities, again, were involved in the heavy rains late June, early July, the ones that went on and off and on, off and on for several days? And hands up, how many were susceptible? Yeah, more than just Gainsborough, right? Many, many different rural municipalities, many different urban municipalities, all were impacted. All had emergencies. Gainsborough is just the example community, just to pick one. Melville all the way to the southeast, down to the border. October, just outside of Prudhomme, natural gas cavern, explosion and fire. Taxed that community and the surrounding communities and their response resources for days. Affected a significant number of the people in the community. Here's a picture of Gainsborough. Truck for sale. Anyone want to buy a Chev? Evacuations. Huge toll on the community and the people within the community. This takes a lot of planning, takes a lot of effort, has a lot of impact on people's lives. It's very, very disruptive. It's very, very stressful. This is why you need a plan. This is why you need to prepare to minimize the impact on the people of your community. 200 millimeters of rain. When we decided that's what? 19 feet, right? So much water leading in and out of the community. Gainsborough was an island. Had a moat. Clare, Saskatchewan. I've lived here all my life. I thought I'd been to every community in the province at some point in my life, or I've been there because my wife is terrible at navigation and I end up driving through it, but I'd never heard of Clare until this event happened, and just outside of Wadena, right? A very small community. Clare obviously had an emergency, train derailment, explosion, fire. Wadena had an emergency too, because they were the big town nearby that had to be the center for the resources, had to be the center for information for people, had to be the center for the different representatives from all the different agencies that were working and responding to the event. Wadena had to open its operations center. They had an emergency because something happened several miles down the road. It wasn't Wadena's emergency, but they had to be able to respond to that emergency. Another reason why your community needs a plan. That's just some of the detail about it. Regina Beach. Never heard of it, Ken? I always wonder about this picture. It says Regina Beach before and after. Obviously the bottom picture is before, but does anything look odd about the before picture there? For December? It doesn't look that cold for December. I don't know, you must get Chinooks just north of Regina that we don't get in Regina. Anyway, lovely community. I look forward to Ken's part. Okay, a government guy can't go 20 minutes without talking about his legislation, right? It's just something we are all so proud of and we love to death. The Emergency Planning Act says that you, the local authority, is responsible at all times for the response to the emergency. You're responsible for the response to your emergency. There's no going, hey province, you do it. There's no doing that. You're at all times responsible. But when your capacity is exceeded, when you don't have the ability to respond because, hey, we're small, we just can't do it ourselves, we've got staff that are going to be there and give you help and give you advice, and you're going to turn to neighboring communities, and you're going to turn to us and say, we can't do it, but we want to try do it, please help us. Neighboring communities, come and help us. So the first level of response is your municipality. Neighboring municipalities can come and help. Province can come and advise and assist, and we will. There's a simple step, and I think Bernie's going to talk about what steps they went through in their emergency plan, but it's a fairly simple process, 9-step emergency plan development. Some of our staff tried to convince me we need a 12-step program because it would be so familiar to many people of Saskatchewan to have a 12-step program. I said no, let's stick with 9. We don't want to confuse anyone and them show up at the wrong meeting. 9-step program, we have staff that can come out and help deliver this workshop to you and help you by the end of that workshop go away with a bit of a draft plan or at least a good start on it. Many communities look at the material that we have in the 9-step program. There's sample plan there, there's sample bylaws, that sort of thing, and they use it as a good work tool, a workbook and a workshop. And it's a good way for them, their community, and their neighboring communities as part of their mutual aid area to work on this. Buzz through the steps. Step 1, say, hey, we're going to do it. Step 2, appoint someone. Appoint an emergency measures coordinator for your community, an EMO coordinator. And it isn't, he didn't show up today, let's appoint him. Don't appoint the mayor. We also recommend, in many cases, strongly consider not appointing your fire chief if you have a fire chief. I'll talk about that later and we can go into some discussion about it. Develop a management control structure. Again, our 9-step program, all our detailed information, we talk about what that means. It's the same as you normally have for your government, but for an operations center and in your plan, this person's in charge, this person's going to chair meetings, these are the people that are going to come in, the wastewater person, the public works guy or gal is going to be in there, the administrator, et cetera, et cetera. Those are going to be part of our team. That's the structure. Look at the hazards and analyze the risk. Do you spend a lot of time planning for a 747 crashing on your local airport? Maybe not if you don't have an airport and if your airport doesn't have a lot of 747s landing in it anyway. So don't spend a lot of time on that. So look at what's real for your community. And what is real? You're going to have what you know you're going to. You don't have to spend a lot of time on that, but there's a process to do this. Compile your resources. Know what you've got, know what your neighboring communities have got, and what you have access to. And we're not talking about toys and trucks with lights on them, etc. Not just that. We're talking about people and capability and resources. Create a notification system. Right? You have to tell people, and I think Ken will probably talk about that for Regina Beach, how they informed their citizens of what's going on. Talk about the delegation, communication, how to keep people informed, keep all the different agencies that are coming from government or wherever that are helping, as well as the citizens. And then sort your plan out into a very pretty binder, electronically, whatever else, make it available, publish it. Here's what a lot of communities have experienced, and we've collected that. A couple of common themes that we thought might be useful. The communication bit. Be ready for information, or with information. You need to be able to sort out the misinformation, and I know I'm 5 minutes over. I'm still good? Okay, I'm good. Sorry. You get me for another 4.3 minutes. We used to talk about Coffee Row. Coffee Row is dead. Coffee Row was nothing. That was easy. That was a piece of cake. Coffee Row has been replaced by something a million times worse than Coffee Row, and that's Facebook and Twitter. You cannot keep up to Facebook and Twitter. It is the rumor mill. You know, all the Coffee Row is saying this, that you guys are just doing this, and this is happening, and we have to evacuate the whole town. It isn't Coffee Row saying that anymore. It's Facebook and Twitter. And it is people from all over the country that have an interest in your town because their second cousin's former nephew's landlord's gardener is in that town, and so they're putting something on Facebook about it, or they're tweeting about it. You're not going to be able to stay ahead of it, but you need to be able to react to it, and react to it with good information. Maybe Ken will talk about that, maybe Bernie will talk about that, but it's Coffee Row on steroids. Information and having someone on top of that and being ready to react all the time and work with the media, because they're going to say, we've heard that this happened. We've heard that you're doing this. We've heard this. You need to be able to say, doesn't matter what you've heard. This is the fact. This is the reality. your website, news release, spokesperson, etc. Have the ability to deal with that, is what I'm saying. Fire chief often pointed the EMO coordinator. When an emergency happens, the fire chief, in a smaller community especially, is more likely someone that's got a lot of training and may need to go and lead his firefighters, his or her firefighters, at a scene, out there at the emergency. Not likely going to be available to sit in the operations center and work with the administrator and all of the other different representatives that may be in an emergency operations center. That firefighter may be needed at the scene, that because that fire chief has a lot of skills and experience and is need to lead and operate a lot of the equipment to be able to be at the scene and responding. That's what we've found in a lot of communities. That they're trying to be in two places at once doesn't always work. Give that some thought. Pick the brains of our staff that we have that work with your community when you're working on your plan, and see whether or not you want to consider someone else as the EMO coordinator. That fire chief is going to have a huge role in your plan no matter what. Maybe that's just not the right role. I don't like that slide. I just read it for, as I said, this is the first time I've ever seen this stuff. I don't like that it says when we step in. It sounds like we step in to take over. That's not the case. We step in not to take over. We step up to help. Right? We show up to give some advice and assistance and to help you through something. And I'm planting a seed in Bernie and Ken's ear here, and maybe they'll echo that. Maybe they'll confirm that we don't show up and take over and say, all right, province is here, you can go home, we're in charge. When you are overwhelmed, you go to your neighboring communities, you ask us for some help, some advice and assistance. We're going to show up and give you some advice and assistance. We're there when you are preparing, when you're working on that plan, when you're putting it all together, when you're not having your emergency. So before, while you're planning, we'll be there to help you. When you have your emergency, we'll come and help you implement that plan that you worked on, or that you should have worked on and didn't, and we'll help you create one really quick. We'll give you advice on what to do. We'll also show up. Our branch has some stuff, and I'll show a picture of some of them, some of the stuff we have. We'll show up with a few people and some kit, some toys, some response equipment, material that may be of help, that may augment what you have. Most of that kit, most of that stuff is at our warehouse, at our logistics base in Prince Albert. We have things like flood barrier equipment. Anyone heard of the term HESCO barriers? It's like a giant sandbag wall that's, rather than individual sandbags, it's a big wall of stuff. We have things like that. We have massive sandbag stockpiles. We have sandbagging machines, which are gravity-fed or augmented by an auger. Sandbagging machines. We have a handful of staff that can help deliver these sorts of things around the province, but not necessarily show up and be your manpower. That is not what is going to happen. They can show up and help augment your volunteer force or give advice, a little bit of supervision, a little bit of leadership, a little bit of training to your volunteer force that you've got organized in accordance with your plan. And then our guys are off to the next community down the road that also needs our help and assistance. All right? Here's some examples of some of the stuff that I'm talking about that we threw around in 2014. 615,000 sandbags. Those aren't bags full of sand. Those are pretty heavy. We wouldn't be trucking those all over the highways of the province. Those were empty bags that went somewhere and then got filled and deployed. Sandbaggers, again, the big machines that help fill the sandbags. Go baggers are little hand things. Flood barriers, 11,790 feet. That's probably about 35 hectometer, decameter, kilometer liters. Flood barriers, water pumps, large capacity pumps, small capacity pumps, individual locations, augment what you have there. We set up about 12 different recovery centers after your emergency when people are like, oh, we got to clean up, we need some money, maybe the financial assistance program, etc. Our ministry set up recovery centers in the various locations that needed help. Not just our staff and our programs there, but SaskPower and Sask Energy and Red Cross and Health and Agriculture and all the different government programs that might be of assistance at a recovery center. A couple of thousand people showed up, 82 different communities. There's the events. These are what you need to plan for, because these are communities just like yours. Train derailment, water main breaks. Oh, it was a bad year last year for that. Meadow Lake and Assiniboia. Actually, there were hundreds in Saskatoon itself. Flooding and swift current, that's all in March. April. Wildfires in the southwest. I don't know why East End is in the southwest. So wildfires down there, and up in the northeast we had flooding. Wildfires in swift current, red pheasant, Atacacoop, mosquito, all these different First Nations. Flood prevention activities around Prince Albert area. Major rainstorms, we say July, but it was late June and July. In the southeast, torrential rains, remember, 85 feet of rain fell in July, or whatever 200 mils is. Outlook, tornado touchdown and some damage. August, storms, power outages. Slumping, Last Mountain Lake. Anyone doesn't know what that is, you can look it up, but it's very, 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 very slow. Landslide is what it is. Train derailment, Clare, gas fire, wildfire near Kindersley, and apparently there's a gas line explosion at Regina Beach. Cool. You remember it, Ken? There's a rumor. All right. So we have a plan. The government of Saskatchewan has a plan to be able to help out communities. Blah, blah, blah. We have a plan. All government agencies work together in an operations center. We do similar to what you do when you have your emergency. We have staff that'll come out. We've organized into districts. What provincial government agency isn't? We all have districts, regions, whatever we want to call them. You're in one of those. We have a staff member that will support all the communities in various districts. You probably have met some of our staff. They wear blue outfits like this, and they actually have the expertise in helping you develop your plans more than I do. I have expertise in telling them to go help you with your plans. So we have different incident levels. Our goal, work together, protect people, protect property. And I don't think we're doing questions right now. We're doing it at the end. Is that right, Don? I'd like to thank you very much, and I'd especially like to thank this half of the room. Way better at staying awake than that half of the room. You guys sucked. They were good. Extra desserts for these guys. Thank you.
Hi. I want to thank you very much for having me up to visit today and to sort of explain what transpired in Regina Beach in December. Also, I'm just going to touch quickly on the spring flooding and land movement that we did have at the beach. The 2014 started the same way as any year. First came January, followed by February, March, April, May, and then came June. We had 29 inches of rain at Regina Beach in 16 days. This led to landslides, ground movement, water line breaks, gas line breaks, houses with damage to the foundations. They still continue, although now they have slowed down a little bit. The ground is sort of hardened up. It doesn't slide so easy. It's called frost. We had to declare a state of emergency, our first state of emergency as a result of the damage from the water, the rains in June. It did not affect our emergency management team. This was a town situation, a village situation. As emergency management coordinator, I serve for both communities. We have a joint operation, and we basically run it on a 50-50 basis. What you need, we give. What the other needs, they give. We remained in a state of emergency in June and early July for a period of 2 weeks before it was lifted because of all the movement. We had some houses where sections of them dropped 4.5 feet into the ground. A few that were more or less totaled off, I guess you would say, that are not repairable. Thank God it's settled. However, we continue to see amassing problems throughout the town. We had in excess of 80 water breaks this past summer and fall. It kept our town public works very busy. And I was called in as the coordinator to assist. We were tracking everything. I was looking after that end for him, taking pictures and recording various areas that we would have to be looking at. I guess you would say I was the town volunteer for that part. Okay. This refers to the December 3rd Sask Energy gas line. It was a major explosion at Regina Beach. What you see in front of you there now is a quiet and usual winter scene in early afternoon. As you view the lake along Center Street from the Home Hardware, looking towards where everybody's out ice fishing today. The house you see, whoops, I guess we jumped one too. You did that, didn't you? It is her. You were right, Colin. It's very touchy, I guess. Well, I'm out of order, I guess. Anyway, let's see if we can pick up here. I've got a few here, I guess, that were added since I had done this. Okay, here we are. At 2:23, a 911 call was received at Regina from Regina Beach. This was the first of many chaos and prime ingredient of emergency agencies being dispatched. We're given information that not only was not correct, but was quite exaggerated in some extents. The original information was 12 homes were destroyed, multiple fatalities, and a huge explosion and fire at Green and 2nd Avenue. The actual location was 217 1st Street East. Green Avenue is on the west side of Regina Beach. 2nd Avenue does not go to the west side. So it goes to show that emergency response personnel did not have the correct location to start with. However, by the time they got there, they knew where they were going. It was quite visible for a long distance off. Both Regina Beach and Lumsden fire departments were dispatched along with the RCMP and first responders. And also the Saskatoon and Regina Stars helicopters. They were not dispatched, however, overheard the original call that came in and the situation that was being reported, and they started towards our area to lend support and be prepared. In fact, there was approximately 4 to 5 minor injuries as a result, and only 8 homes destroyed. Now I say only 8. The only reason I say only is because in the original, there was 12 homes destroyed, multiple fatalities. We were very fortunate. If this had been 10:30 in the morning, 11 o'clock in the morning, it would have been a totally different situation. 217 1st Street is directly beside our post office. Between 10 o'clock and 11:30 in the morning, we'll refer to it as Collins Coffee Row. Many people come down to get their mail in the morning. They stand around and they visit people that they don't see every day, and they'll talk. And there could have been anywhere from 20 to 30 people outside our post office at the time of this explosion. At 2:23, an explosion rocked the town, and this left 217 1st Street, the center of the blast, destroyed. As Sask Energy gas line rupture, leaking underground, it exploded. Does your community have an emergency plan, equipment, and a team to deal with it? We had a plan, and we had a small budget to start with, and I had 5 or 6 trained volunteers who had taken the basic emergency management course. Not very many when it comes to a situation that we had to deal with. It takes money and it takes preparedness to be ready for what you are about to see. Your EMO needs phones, radios, and equipment necessary to handle a situation. Communication is of utmost importance. Before it happens, not after the fact. What you see is a house. It was a 2-story, 102-year-old building that was a historical site at Regina Beach. It is now rubble and girders and a large crater in the ground, totally gone. The gas line that ruptured and had been leaking for some time ran directly underground along the front of this house. In that same channel of services was a main SaskTel telephone supply from our local SaskTel building in town across through to Buena Vista. As a result of this explosion, the telephone lines to all of Buena Vista and part of Regina Beach were also destroyed and were without service. We were trying to call out some of our personnel, and we were either getting message manager or no answer, and we just thought nobody was home. We didn't know until actually the next day that the phone lines for all of Buena Vista were gone. And probably 50% of my staff or crew or volunteers were from the Buena Vista area. As emergency crews arrived and began to assess the crisis situation, it was determined that there was still a huge risk for further explosions and damage. The area was crowded with onlookers and people wanting to help or just wanting to take pictures and see what was going on. It was another disaster waiting to happen. This area was difficult to police and evacuate as it had so many ways to get into this location. Emergency responders and delegated personnel were asked to start evacuating the area, other than for fire and rescue people. This was a huge task and not to the liking of bystanders and picture takers wanting to watch. There was a real possibility of further gas leaks and fire resulting in further explosions. A real risk that fortunately did not happen, but could have. At 4:45, the fire chief came to me and asked that we put the emergency measures team into effect and open a command center, which we did. We also set up a reception center at the school at Regina Beach. We were asking people to check in because of the fact that there was 8 homes destroyed and a lot of others suffered heavy damage. There was debris everywhere. We were evacuating an 800-meter area around the blast site, approximately 3 blocks, 3.5 blocks. We were asking people, even if they were okay and not at home at the time, to come and check in so that we had an idea of what we might have to deal with. Communication here, like I say, the telephones were out. What did come into play was Facebook, Twitter. Before we even had emergency crews on site, Facebook had more information about this location than we did. EMO was called in at 5 o'clock on a request by myself, and I had addressed the town council, advising them that my initial viewing of the area, and that in conversation with the fire chief, that we definitely needed to go into a state of emergency. We had residents that would have, or residential areas that would have to be searched for victims and clear houses, evacuate the area, and because of the risk of further explosions, which continued through until early the next day, we got that state of emergency in place right away. This was our second state of emergency at Regina Beach in 6 months. That's too many. Just goes to show you that that old saying, it'll never happen here, when you hear about it somewhere else, it does, and it happens real quick, and it can be real drastic. The following few slides that we found, after you see these, you make your decision. Is it necessary to have an emergency plan and an emergency measures team to handle it? What would you do, and how would you respond? I've got to thank my daughter for a lot of these pictures. She's a resident of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. When an emergency is declared and we open a command center, I really don't get to the scene. We have an on-site commander, and my job is to coordinate and help get support services for those that are on site. And as a result, I don't really see what's going on. It was 5 days before I actually saw the scene itself. By then, of course, the fires are out. There was still a lot of damage. Some of it had been cleaned up. I had my wife ask on Facebook if anybody had any pictures of the scene within the first little while so that I could do this presentation. My daughter sent about 20 from Baton Rouge. That shows you the spread of Facebook and Twitter. What you see in front of you there is debris in the trees, fire, smoke, debris all over the road. This was the initial scene. A mass of fire and debris. Nobody knew whether anybody had been in the house at the time. Our post office being located right next door, and a house across the street. As you see there, there's a big hole in the side of the wall. Half of the roof is gone. The gentleman and his wife that live in that house were home at the time. Their daughter was in the basement. Along the left side of that building, there are some basement windows, and there was debris and rock went in through those windows as a result of the explosion. Fortunately, they had a couple of bruises, suffered a little bit of shock, but nobody was hurt. Houses needed to be searched for victims and survivors. You can see how widespread the debris is on the road. There was debris that was found laying on the roads, on roofs, embedded in the side of cottages and houses for about 3 blocks. At the time of the explosion, I was sitting at home watching Family Feud, sitting in my recliner chair, my little Bijong sitting in my lap sleeping, and there was a very abrupt, loud explosion. I thought somebody, by the way the house had shook, somebody had actually driven into the foundation of my house with a vehicle. I got up, I ran out, of course I went right around the house, couldn't find anything. I suffered some damage in my house. There was a huge crack come down the front over the front door. They had to hit the house. Nothing. Went out to the garage because I knew my wife was on her way home from work. Maybe she hit the garage. I don't know. Nothing there. She was pulling in. Everything was okay. So I got on the phone. I called Lynette at the town office. She told me there was a house totally gone. She didn't know what else, but she said it was a real mess. So I said I would make my way down. I knew the fire department and police were en route. I went down to help with a little bit of traffic control, staying back from the scene, because they didn't need extra people in there in the way. As you can see, the smoke got very heavy. A fact of life, we have a volunteer fire department at Regina Beach. is comprised of a lot of residents who commute back and forth to Regina to work. As a result, the Lumsden Fire Department, that was also dispatched out, had arrived on scene a few moments before our fire truck did, because a lot of our guys had to come from work before they could get to the fire truck. Again, it's a matter of being prepared. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of work at Regina Beach, and so your residents are somewhere else. Again, some more debris, trees covered with insulation, sections of wall. There was large 3 by 3 or 4 foot sections of wall that were laying up in the trees, created a hazard. Telephone lines, power lines, all in disruption because of fire and debris hitting them. As you can see, some of those wires dangling there also added to some of the concern. The house was 102 years old. People that had bought it a couple years ago, completing it, to be a cottage, they lived in the city. We did not know that they weren't at the house at the time. It was a major concern. The fire chief and one of the firefighters looking around, checking some of the debris, searching for victims, etc. The post office, where the blue arrow is in the center there. That's a late 70s Mercedes-Benz in excellent shape. It was a beautiful car, navy blue, belonged to the postmistress. Not much anymore. We'll sell it cheap if anybody wants to restore it. You can see the debris laying on top of it. You can hardly see the car. That is the post office. It's just in behind. She was serving one customer at the counter at the time of the explosion, and there was another fellow had just left, was on the sidewalk out front. That side wall was blown in. There's a large hole. One wall was leaning, was about to collapse. Part of the roof was gone. They crawled out the back window on the far side to the back left there. They went out through a back window. They crawled out uninjured. A little dusty and dirty, but fortunately they were okay. The fellow that was standing on the street in front of the post office was thrown right across the street. His truck was on the opposite side of the road and he was thrown into the side of it. There is a large dent in his truck. He had a little bit of a concussion, and that was it. Hard to believe. If this had happened in July, Regina Beach currently has a population of about 1,500 people. Add another 850 in Buena Vista, and in Canucama with about 400. In the summertime, we have a residency of about 10,000 people. Half of Wade's people are out there for the summer. They come from Regina, they come from everywhere else. We were fortunate. Some of the emergency people that were in and looking for survivors, victims, providing whatever assistance they could, getting people out. And there's an actual look of the street that incorporates most of it. The blast site on the immediate front left, the post office, looking down the street, and to the right was that house where I showed you the hole in the wall where the 3 people were in there. On the north side, not yet seen, is the nice white house, another one that was destroyed. In total, we lost 8 residents' homes, and many more were heavily damaged. Another shot. You see the insulation and sections of board up in the trees. About 4 houses to the south of where this happened, there was a new house being built. There was 4 fellows up on the roof doing the plywood and whatnot, laying the roof down. The blast took everything above and past them. None of them were hit by anything. None of them were hurt. None of them were blown off the roof. I can't understand that one either because there was houses further down that were heavily damaged. God was looking after a lot of us that day. 1 block north towards the lake, looking up the hill. For those that don't know Regina Beach, we're built on the side of the hill overlooking the Capel Valley and Last Mountain Lake. This picture was taken a little later afterwards. Shows the foundation of the house that was taken out. We had a major problem with our emergency response in that we had radios, and I had a requisition in at the town office. I put it in approximately 2 years earlier that we had antennas to go up so we could get a base radio. With being on a hill and spread out along such a long distance, our portable radios didn't really carry that far, and the hill come into play. The emergency command center had been set up by the school up on top of the hill. We had trouble making contact with people at the bottom. I had also put a request in a year ago to get those antennas mounted. We have 2 command sites that we have designated, a master one and a secondary. We have a base radio. All I needed was the antenna mounted on the roof and the coax wire down with the cord left hanging inside where we would be situated. 2 years. When we came to this situation, we had our hands full. Cell phone service in the area was exceptionally busy. Everybody is on Facebook, everybody's on Twitter, and everybody's trying to phone somebody, find out what's going on. Our phone lines, a lot of them were out. So communication was really a problem for us. We managed and we survived through it, and we got things done. Fortunately, it didn't cause any more significant problem. Again, a shot of the site, the corner of the post office. We have again submitted a work order to get our antennas mounted as a result. Some of our councillors were at the command center and saw the chaos and the difficulty that we had in trying to get not only calls in, but calls out. There was one phone at this location which was operational, but it was under constant use with people calling in, finding out information, calling to see if they could bring down food and various things. Response people trying to get a hold of us to get through. My cell phone, I probably fielded about 400 calls in the first 2 days because there was no other way they could get through to our comm center. My number was on the website for the Lions Club, and everybody knew that. So as a result, a lot of them went that way to try and find out how to get a hold of us. Now, it's been committed that our antennas are going up sometime in the next week, week and a half. So unfortunately, it took a disaster to get it done. Be prepared, get the stuff that you need, have it in place. If you never need it, it's a bonus. If you need it, it's too late. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. What kind of radios do we have in mind? Well, we have portable radios with a base radio. We have it licensed through the federal government, through the proper procedures. But the base was no good to us without an antenna. That antenna had to be up. Our portables had a range of about 2.5 kilometers, but once you go over the hill, you lose it. It's relatively steep going down. I got to move along here. That's the front of the post office. This is after the fact. You can see where Sask Energy was digging to get down to the gas line and large trenches. They found a lot of, well, actually, just to sort of summarize, they found approximately 9 or 10 different leaks of gas lines within the town over the next week. They were temporarily repairing them, and then they started going around changing T-intersections and whatnot because of the fact that that's the side of that house again where it went through the wall. one shot here I want to get to, and then a lot of these are just damage and whatnot of the houses. There's an old Bluebird Cafe a block and a half away. The windows were blown out of it. There is one of the T's I'm referring to, the main services. You can see the wow where the arrow points in. There was also a crack through there, and that's where they found the main gas line leak had started. And as a result of ground movement from the spring runoffs and whatnot, that was what they found had occurred, and they, of course, started to repair from there. Sask Energy has taken on a lot of the responsibility from this as a result. They've been excellent to work with. The one thing I want to say before I step down is Colin and his crew are your best friend before, during, and after an incident. We had 3 or 4 fellas that were out there the entire time. When I started downtown, when this original call came in, I was already on the phone, and I called Cal Knowles to give him a heads up that we had this explosion, that we felt it might be a major thing, and he and a couple others started out our way, that if they could be assistance, they were. Make sure that you put your plan into effect, make sure that you have a team in place, and make sure that they have the equipment they need. We got away lucky. It could have been a lot worse. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Ken, for that. My name is Bernie Morton. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer in Kindersley, and I think that part of the moral of the story that we're hearing from the 2 previous speakers is that events will happen, and they do happen. And what is important is that probably that every single one of you that are in this room today have some responsibility for ensuring not only the safety of your particular community, but being properly prepared in the event that one of these events, whether it's a natural disaster or whether it's a man-made disaster, that you're properly prepared to enact a plan and to do your very best to protect your community from the outcomes of those particular incidents. I'm not here to profess to be an expert in emergency planning by any stretch of the imagination. But you know, if any of you have driven by a car accident, often people will slow down and they'll take a look and they'll see what type of tragedy is taking place. All those photographs that we just saw from Ken were taken by bystanders. Most people have the ability to look and keep walking. Or 80% of the news that we watch today is negative. You know, it's about tragedies, things that are happening around the world. But there are a group of people and collective of people who are responsible for responding to these particular incidents. How many of you in this room are directly responsible for that? And how many are in some way, shape, or form indirectly responsible for that? That's right. And how many of you feel that you are prepared for whatever type of incident may come your way? You do? Well, congratulations, because I've never yet felt or seen anyone who is 100%, feels 100% prepared for anything. And the reason being is that we don't really know what types of hazards may come our way. It could be something as a water main break that impacts and your community may have to go on boil water advisories. That in of itself is an emergency. Or it could be a catastrophic earthquake, tornado, or fire that impacts your community. The question really for all of us is, how well prepared are you? In Kindersley, we've had some recent incidents of late. My first was in 1995 when I was part of the communications team responding to a subway crash that killed 3 people and seriously injured about 30 others. It was an eye-opening experience to see bodies being pulled out, partially torn apart. But what was uniform in each and every one of the incidents that I've been involved with, either directly or indirectly, is the fact that there has been a plan, and the plan has been implemented with extreme professionalism. And that's the key, is that you have to take a very professional approach to these particular plans. So in Kindersley, we've actually updated our plan. We had a fire in 2013, landfill fire, which I'm going to speak to very briefly on. And our amended plan, actually, I love acronyms. I think it allows for simplicity. But this is what our plan is focused on. This is what we focus on. We want our plan to be safer. And safer is about, it has to be simple, it has to be adaptable, flexible, effective, and you need to have the resources in order to be able to implement that. So what does that mean? What is simple? You heard Colin say that, it's not too difficult to put a plan together. I'd say that the province has excellent resources available online about planning, but each plan is unique to your own community. Use those as a template and modify those plans, and we'd recommend always be going back and review those particular plans for their effectiveness. So it needs to be simple. You need to be generally recognized vocabulary, and the reason why is that in the event that an emergency is being declared in your community, and you need to open your EOC, you're going to have a wide variety of individuals who this isn't their day-to-day lives. They're not like Colin, who lives this stuff every day and gets paid professionally for it. They're volunteers, people coming in off the street who are part of your organization chart. And simplicity is really important. We found that in dealing with the province, as amazing as they have been, they use a lot of vernacular and acronyms that most people didn't know about. So we had some people sitting around the table, and this is a little plug for Colin, saying, what does that mean? What does that mean? And of course, we have to go back and you have to ask the experts to tell us just exactly what some of those are. And they have to be prepared. You have to be, I'm going to use the word prepared often, but how do you become prepared? You have to have tabletop exercises, do mock exercises, practice. A plan is only as good as its ability to be implemented. Adaptable basically means that, as you had heard from Ken, that when they had their emergency with the explosion, a lot of their people weren't around or they weren't available. And what does that mean? You have to have a plan that is adaptable enough that in the event that someone who's on your org chart doesn't happen to be around or available, that your whole plan doesn't fall apart. It has to be adaptable in a way that responds to any type of situation. Our new plan is actually broken down in a variety of different segments, and those segments are broken down by the type of emergency. Whether it's flood, whether it's a fire, whether it's a highway closure because of bad weather, tornado, we have them all broken down in a variety of different categories. Flexible means that taking someone out and being able to put somebody into that particular aspect of the plan. Flexible also because with our landfill fire, we had declared a local state of emergency. We're for the better part of a week. We're focusing all of our energies and attentions on that. People can get burned out really quickly. You may see someone's name on an org chart, but the same person can't keep doing that particular role for days on end. People need to rest. And so we had cots set up for people to be able to rest. But when you take someone out of that particular plan, does that mean that the role and responsibility doesn't continue? No, it does. And so you need to have someone else who's able to slip into that. And that's why the flexibility of your plan, we would suggest, needs to be such that that allows for that. On the day one of the implementation of our plan, when we had our landfill fire in October 2013, I agree with Colin. Your mayor is not the. How many mayors in the room here? Any mayors? You are not the EOC coordinator. In fact, you relinquished pretty much all of your powers to the people whose job and responsibility is to implement these plans. But the mayors do have a very, very important role, and that is as observing to see that everything is actually going as it should be, and being able to provide some outside advice in terms of how the plan, as it's supposed to be implementing, whether or not it is being implemented as the chief magistrate of the municipality wants it to be implemented. And the other particular role is as communicator. The mayor needs to be front and center as part of the communication plan, and I'll speak about that quickly. So I was referencing that on day one, when we had declared a local state of emergency, opened our EOC, called in the support of the province, and after sort of half day, our mayor, who was there as an observer, I don't see him here right now, took me aside and said that he said, I think we need to make a change in our EOC coordinator. And I asked why, and he gave me his very specific reasons why. He said, effective immediately, I am now appointing you as our EOC coordinator. I have greater faith in your ability to act as our EOC coordinator than the person who we had hired. What do you do when that particular situation arises? And so he had a discussion with the EOC coordinator and said, we're making a change, and this is the reason why. There's an important role for you to play in this particular event, and this is what we think that should be. The professionalism of that EOC coordinator, and I referenced earlier about professionalism with everyone within the scope of an emergency, was such that she said, yes, I understand, and I will step back and allow your CAO to step in and be the EOC coordinator. That's where your plan needs to be flexible enough to be making small changes or significant ones like that. The reasons for that particular decision really are not important at this particular stage of the game, but what is important is the flexibility capacity of your plan to be able to make changes. Effective. You know, a vision without a plan, I say, is a fantasy. And a plan that is not effective in its ability to be implemented is really not worth its weight. And again, the only way that you can assure that your plan can be effective is by trying it out. You have to have some mock exercises, tabletops, just to see whether or not it works. And then the most important thing about the effectiveness of a plan, for those of you that have had to implement your plan, go back and review it if you haven't already. Where did it work well and where didn't it work well? And change it if you need to. It's your plan. If you are municipal legislators, if you're part of a municipal body, it is your plan. And it's your responsibility to the public to ensure that that particular plan properly serves the people who elected you. Again, the plan should be practical, not theoretical. Resources, well, this is a big learning lesson that we had in our plan when we started to implement our particular plan. We recognized that many of the resources that we had outlined in our plan were actually not available anymore. And the reason why is that some companies that we had indicated that had particular types of equipment that we needed in order to implement our plan, well, those companies no longer existed, or they had merged into other companies, and we didn't have an accurate inventory of all the things that you would need. And so I would argue that one of the most important components of any particular plan is that you make sure that you have the resources, and the resources are a combination of human resources, the people, and also the technical or the hard resources, supplies needed to be able to implement that. So that is our SAFER plan, that little acronym which, you know, constantly we're looking at and making sure that as we're revising our plan. And why do we put together a plan? Well, we like to say that proper planning prevents poor performance. And there is no plan that is perfect. I can guarantee you that there's no plan that is perfect. Every single plan. And if you think that your plan is perfect, that's great, but try to perfect on perfection if you possibly can. And you should also let your public know that no plan is perfect. Let them know now, because if in the event that you do have an emergency, let them know that you have a really good plan. It may not be perfect, but you're striving towards perfection. And in the event that emergency comes up, where you feel prepared in order to be able to implement that. Municipalities must have a plan, and I think that that's good legislation, that you must have a plan. And for those smaller communities that you think that you have a plan, I assume that your administrators have properly told you that you've had a plan. Ask to see it. How many have actually seen their plan and read it? Sorry, I have to put that in as an administrator. My apologies. It's important to know that that plan is there. And do a due diligence on the plan. If you see that there's a particular hole, you have a right to ask questions about that particular plan, especially if you are part of implementing that plan, or if you are responsible as a municipal councillor for having that plan in place. The EOC is a very important component. It is the lifeline and the think tank of the implementation and adaptation and response to your emergency. What happens in the incident command center and on the field, all of that is really as a result of what goes on in the EOC. Key roles of people need to be very, very clearly defined, and they need to be able to work together. Imagine you're getting all these people together. Some of them don't know each other. They've never worked together before. And you're thrusting them all together in a room around a table, and you say, your job is to come up with a solution towards this particular event. You need very strong leadership in order for that to be able to be successful. You need to have people who are adaptable and people who are willing to recognize that the ultimate goal is for everyone to put their egos aside and to work towards the ultimate goal of dealing with this emergency. Prior training is really important. There's probably many people within your community who have good experience in dealing with emergencies. You should seek them out. It doesn't only just need to be the municipal administration who are part of your plan. You may have fantastic people within your community who have excellent background, or maybe they're really level-headed and steady in an emergency. Those are the types of people that you want to have. Our plan is such that everyone has a binder. You walk into the room and it's all alphabetized. You pick up your binder, you pick up your package, and it's all right there. If you've never before been responsible for communications, it has a short little Coles Notes version of this is what your responsibility is as the person who's helping with communications. Page by page, step by step. And that way, if the person who actually is responsible for communications is not available, someone else can step into that particular role. Well, our motto in Kindersley is experience our energy. In this case, we're saying experience our emergencies because we've had quite a few in the last little while. In 2010, we had a major rink fire that burned down our rink, and a local state of emergency was declared in order to be able to deal with that. We lost the rink. It has since been replaced, but it had severe impact on the community. And the impact on the community is not only just in terms of the resources and the amount of time that it takes to deal with a particular incident, but there's also psychological impacts as well. And the psychological impacts is when you're taking a beacon of a community like an arena where families congregate and they watch their kids play hockey or figure skating or curling. You've taken that out. There's an emotional toll there as well. And your plan should recognize that there are psychological impacts to emergencies, and how will you deal with those? Who are the professionally trained people to help with that? The quick case study that I'm going to refer to is a fire that took place the night of Monday, October the 7th, 2013. This is an inferno. The official investigation into the fire is cause undetermined. We believe it's because of illegal dumping that took place, and some materials that were not supposed to go into the landfill were actually put into the landfill, and it happened on the west end of our landfill site, and that combusted, and it started this photograph was taken probably likely 2.5 hours into the fire. So just a little bit about our landfill operations. It is a regional landfill. We were very receptive to other communities' garbage and did not do a good enough job in monitoring the type of waste that would go into our landfill, and monitoring the type of waste that is allowed under our permit. You know, we were kind neighbors. We basically accepted pretty much everything with the exception of oil-filled waste. And even when we knew that from time to time there was some illegal oil-filled waste dumping happening, we'd do our best to try and figure out who the culprit was. But, you know, we didn't pay too much attention to it. And that was a mistake. Since then, we've dramatically changed that particular operation, and this landfill's at almost the end of its lifespan now. It is located right off of Highway 21, and a stone's throw away, literally a stone's throw away, is a residential community right on the other side of the highway. The proximity of the residential community in its relation to the landfill does not comply with current regulations. So you can imagine when you saw that, the people living right across the street of that, what they would think. It began about 8:40. The fire department determined that it was far too large for their ability to be able to put it out, and we moved from an operation that was focused on moved to an operation focused on containment of the fire. We did that at about 2:30 a.m. and it was through the grace of higher being when we had very strong winds, about 60 kilometers an hour winds that were blowing the fire towards that residential community from the west, that all of a sudden this immense smoke, and you can imagine the smell. All of a sudden we could look up and we could see stars, and that smoke that was on an inclination like this all of a sudden went, and the winds died right down, and that gave us probably about an hour to try and do some better containment of the landfill. The next day in the afternoon, we declared a local state of emergency. And I think it was our quick reaction to recognize that this was beyond our ability to fight, both in terms of the toxins that were being released into the air and the fire itself, beyond our ability to fight. So we very quickly declared a local state of emergency. And the reason why I say very quickly is because more often than not, one of the first questions that came from the press was, well, why are you declaring a local state of emergency? What about this particular situation is so important that it's a local state of emergency? And also the public may say that too, because then when you say local state of emergency, they often think, oh boy, you know, big problems on the horizon. We did it because, again, we recognized we just didn't have the ability to be able to manage it. Very quickly, the provincial team moved in with the required trained personnel to help us in our ELC. And Colin had referenced earlier that they are there not to step in, but to step up. I echo that 100%. We implemented our plan, and we sought their advice, and there was a few times where around the table as we were trying to figure out the best way to manage this particular emergency, and one of them was, do we take an aerial assault or do we take a ground assault on this particular fire? The aerial assault was probably towards upwards of a $500,000 exercise, and we decided to go with a ground assault. The aerial assault was being recommended by some of the provincial team, and it was more of the local team with our local fire department who felt that with the help of the provincial firefighters that were on scene, that they actually could tackle it from the ground. And that was something that probably saved us in the magnitude of about $400,000. So the impacts were still the same, but the costs had greatly reduced the costs. Pretty much every single organization that you can think of, from the Red Cross to the Salvation Army, stepped up. And that's an important component, because for about a week, when you're relying on additional resources, you can't just do it on yourself. You need to get the help from others. I know that we're quickly running out of time, but I would pretty much like to say that we had a provincial air lab that was on site to take air readings near and around the schools and in the close proximity of that particular residential neighborhood. And that really helped, because it helped to quiet some of the residents. There is no amount of communicating that is too much when there is an emergency. And we had an amazing communications team that were dedicated towards giving regular updates. We had moments where we would go live on the radio and interrupt broadcasting to be able to give updates to the community, using, of course, social media, Twitter and Facebook as well. We ended it on day 4. The provincial fire crews, that's pretty much, if you take a look at that picture, if you think 4 days of direct firefighting that was left, I never would have thought that 8 days later we would have been able to reopen our landfill in a minimal capacity. But you think all of a sudden you don't have a week's worth of garbage, your residents start to get upset about that. That's one of the core services that are provided. No garbage pickup, well, you know, people get pretty upset. I think what I'll just say as we conclude here is what we learned, that every emergency is a learning experience. We learned at our landfill that we need to have respirators there because it's surprising to know that there's a remarkable number of landfill fires that happen in communities right across North America. It's actually a common incident. And again, that no amount of communication is too much. Never delay declaring a local state of emergency if you feel that it's outside of your capacity to be able to handle it. You can still open your EOC and you can still have your emergency operations center, but if you think it's beyond your ability to manage, declare a local state of emergency. Legislation tells you how you can do that. Get the province in to help you. I think we're right on the end. We just wanted to say thank you to the Red Cross, Salvation Army, the surrounding RMs who were helping us, and of course the Fire Commissioner's Office who were fantastic in helping us with us. And a state of emergency doesn't need to mean a state of chaos. Your plan is always evolving, and proper preparation prevents poor performance. And any type of situation can happen when you least expect it, and even though you think that you are most capable to be able to deal with an emergency, sometimes slip-ups can happen. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to all of our speakers, and we really are running out of time, but does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? And if so, please come to the microphone to expedite the process a little bit.
Sorry, I could have come to the front, but I did have a couple of questions. We are currently doing fundraising and planning to build a new emergency operations center. Would it be appropriate for us to call you, Colin, or your department and ask for assistance in what all we should be including in that facility?
Short answer, yes.
Okay. And probably Bernie or Colin, we had a webinar last summer in regards to soft response for emergencies. And then, of course, the experts that attended the webinar felt that we should be implementing that into our emergency plan. And the EM coordinator and myself felt that that was something that maybe should be off on its own. How do you feel about that? Should we let the Red Cross and the Salvation Army kind of coordinate the other volunteer groups, such as the churches and the seniors, into a different plan? Because it's not something that's going to be an immediate response?
I'll just quickly say that in regards to that, an emergency can be anything from a major emergency to something very small. We use our emergency plan even when there's a road closure. So last winter we had a couple of times when the highways had to be closed. And of course the highway closes and then you have stranded passengers. What are you going to end up doing with all those stranded passengers? Well, we have cots, and so we implement our plan. It's a small component of the plan, but so I would say everything into one.
So you have kind of implemented into yours. Can I get a copy of yours? I'll email you later.
Absolutely, yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Any other questions, anyone? I don't see any. Thank you all very much. Great information. It sure hits home when you hear from Ken from Regina Beach. I remember, actually, I have my Twitter feed running behind on my computer, and I've spent some time in Regina Beach in the summertime, and immediately, you know, CBC starts reporting there's been an explosion, breaking news explosion in Regina Beach, and I immediately thought the same thing that Ken said. If this would have happened in July, that area is packed with people, and it is a real blessing that nobody was seriously hurt or killed. So we have to be ready, and thank you to our speakers. Excellent information, and enjoy the rest of convention, everyone. Have a good day.